So, start the webinar proper. Welcome. So, marching music is what we all do, and as we all know, it is normally quite loud. And when you talk to people in banding, anecdotally, hearing damage seems to be quite common. So whether it's caused by banding or not is a little unclear, because no one's done any studies on it. But anecdotally, lots of people will tell you they have ringing in their ears and they think that it might be related to playing in bands. So today marks the start of some more concerted action by BYBA to help us all take this a little bit more seriously. You might have heard of the recent court case with the viola player and the orchestra. So it's becoming more prominent in public mind, and we hope that bands and corps will join us to tackle what could be potentially quite a serious problem. So, assuming the technology and the handover works well, I'm now going to hand over to Nick Wray from the British Tinnitus Association. So I'm going to stop sharing this with you, and hopefully she'll be able to share her screen with you. Oh, hold on. Sorry, Roger. Can you hear me? Can everybody else hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Oh, Roger can't. Okay, I'll reply to Roger separately. Okay, so Nick, we can see your screen, so over to you.
Excellent. Well, hello, everybody, and thank you for joining this presentation today. My name is Nick Wray, and I'm struggling to get my slides to move on.
Okay.
Are they moving on or not?
No.
No. They were sharing.
Yeah. Unshare and share again, I think.
Right, okay, so stop sharing, let's share again. Here we go. Well, we're having a slight dip. This all worked fantastically this afternoon.
Yes.
When we tried it out and we set up various things. So yeah, you've seen that now. You should be able to see a picture of me sat in my office. And I'm the communications manager from the British Tinnitus Association. I've worked for the British Tinnitus Association for the last 9 years. I'm not a musician. I think the last time I played an instrument was the recorder in secondary school, and I'm not an audiologist either, but hopefully I'll be able to give you some information about hearing protection, the risk to hearing, and tell you a little bit more about tinnitus. What I'm wanting to cover today is why is hearing protection important? How do we actually work out how loud is too loud? What's tinnitus? And how do you prevent it? And then if you do have tinnitus, and we know a lot of musicians do, well, how do you manage it? So to cover...
So Nick, we still can't see your screen, I'm afraid.
Oh no, it's been trundling through quite nicely. Let me have a look at on Zoom.
I think there's a few people having issues actually, so why don't we pause a minute, and because there's people who were on who aren't anymore. Right, I can see it on Zoom now.
Right, so can you see my slides about protecting it should say protecting your hearing?
Yes, and I can see your notes as well. So if you now do the display settings, we should be fine.
Back in.
Right, I'm just going to, while you're doing that, I'm just going to check with everybody. Stu, are you on and can you hear us? It's just me.
Yeah.
Yeah, right, excellent. So you're working now. Roger, can you, you haven't got any mic working, but can you hear us? Right, Lisa, I know you can hear us because you've spoken to me before.
Right, so how am I going to change the display? How did you do the display settings, Barbara?
Well, I see Rob was on earlier. Is Rob on, Lisa?
Yeah,
I'm with you. So if you go in where you did before, so start sharing as a slideshow, like you did before.
In PowerPoint or
in PowerPoint?
No, in Zoom.
Yeah, no, in PowerPoint. Start your slideshow.
No, that was in Zoom.
Yeah. Are you seeing a slide that says protecting your hearing?
Yes, we are, but we can see it's not in slideshow mode at the minute.
It's whatever you did before when we said that we could see your notes.
That was me. So that was me doing it before, and it was under display settings within PowerPoint.
Is that better?
Oh yes,
That's it.
there you go.
That's it.
Right.
How irritating! It's all worked. Literally, it worked perfectly this afternoon.
Yeah, I'm just thinking I'm not able to actually move the slides on now though with that setting. Oh, unless I resume slideshow. Oh, there we go.
Yeah, right, we're there.
Oh, well, that's a relief.
Right, so why don't you go back to the beginning of your presentation and we'll start again.
Okay, well, I think you got the introduction. You don't need to see my picture, but what I'm hoping to cover today is, and I'm struggling actually to take the slides back. It's not really wanting to work. So that was just a bullet list of what we were talking about. So I'll skip on to why protecting your hearing is important. Hearing is actually remarkably fragile. The mechanism for hearing is incredibly complex. The sound starts as physical waves. They're transmitted by hair cells in the inner ear in the cochlea, which then creates movement, which then creates the electrical signals which get processed by the brain. Now, wherever there is a physical thing in the body, there's wear and tear over time. So as we age, our hearing does deteriorate a little bit. But it can also be damaged in the same way we can damage any other physical aspect of ourselves. Now, unlike a broken leg or a bruise or a burst appendix, protecting your hearing is essential because once it's damaged, your hearing can't be fixed. In humans, these hair cells don't regenerate. So once the damage is done, it's done. The good news is that tinnitus and hearing loss from exposure to loud sounds can be prevented. I'm struggling with this slideshow, it has to be said. It doesn't seem to want to move on. So let me just stop sharing for a moment. And yeah, you're still seeing the last slide, aren't you?
Yeah, does it work if you go up and down on the keyboard?
No.
All right.
It does in my preview, but not on my second screen. So I'm going to stop sharing again.
Why don't we just view it in your the version with the notes on as well?
Yeah, I'm going to share it in my first screen.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you can see that, and then we can click through.
Yeah.
I've not got any notes, and I've not got any sarky comments in my notes, which is quite good. Sometimes, and you won't get preview of any jokes that I might make. So prevention is key, and it's better than cure because, frankly, there is no cure to either the tinnitus or to hearing loss. Now, to make sure that we're not taking unnecessary steps, we really need to work out how loud is too loud, because some sounds are safe. Now, ears interpret a very wide range of noise levels, so you can hear everything from sort of the rubbing of your hands against your arms to the sound of a jet engine. And our hearing is incredible. And in terms of power, the sound of a jet engine is a million times more powerful than the smallest audible sound. That covers a range of from about 1 to 140 decibels. So that means that the sound intensity is actually a logarithmic scale to encompass all that. And what that means is that for very small increases in decibel, the number of decibels, the sound power is increased quite considerably more. So that actually, when we're comparing sound, a small change in the number of decibels can actually mean quite a large increase in the power of sound. Now, to give you some idea of what decibel levels are, we've got a whisper at about 15 decibels. Normal conversation, like I'm speaking now, is about 60. And then these are examples of sound going up that are fairly normal sounds that you should all be probably quite familiar with. Any sound above 85 decibels, which is about the sound of a kitchen blender, can cause hearing loss and tinnitus. Our levels in the UK are slightly lower than the ones that Americans recommend. They reckon 90 decibels, but sort of a health and safety executive over here says 85. Hearing loss and the dangers inherent in sound, it's related to both the power of the sound and the length of exposure. So it's not purely absolute volume. It is a function. It is a function of the two. So you can listen to a lower level sound for longer than you can a higher decibel number of sounds. Safe exposure times actually halve because of this logarithmic scale if there's an increase in the power of the sound by 3 decibels. So to go back to the table from the previous slide, these are the sort of safe exposure times. So you could quite happily play with your blender for 8 hours in the kitchen, making loads of soup, and you'd probably burn out the motor before you damaged your hearing. If you're using a lawnmower, you know, a standard garden size lawn, you're probably going to be fine because the safe exposure limit is an hour in sort of 24 hours. If you were a professional gardener and you were using a ride-on mower and you were spending 3 hours mowing acres of the local bigwigs' pristine lawn, you really need to be wearing hearing protection. If, like many people that seem to sit next to me on trains, you're listening to an MP3 player at maximum volume and that volume's leaking out, you've got 7.5 minutes before you're starting to damage your hearing. And if you're going to a rock concert, you're not really going to be out of the intro before damage happens, because you've got less than a minute. So how do these sounds correlate to the sounds that you're experiencing as band leaders and band members and musicians? Well, if you have a look, a singer at sort of full volume is going to sing at around 70 decibels. Some will be a little bit louder. This is unamplified, but then you can see the range of decibel levels that common instruments come in at. And yes, it's fairly obvious that things like percussion, like the bass drum and the timpani, will be very loud. But actually, instruments which, until I'd done the research on this, I thought would be quite benign, like a clarinet, well, actually, they can be incredibly loud too. And the safe exposure times for those can be well, seconds. I would imagine that particularly in rehearsal, you're not actually going to be at the highest end of those levels. But when you bear in mind that people practice for long periods of time, a French horn player, if they've got an evening of rehearsal, could very easily reach the safe exposure limits. There has been some research that has been done into musicians and their attitudes to loud noise, and also their judgment about sound. And musicians aren't always aware of how loud a sound actually is, and they can't, bizarrely, because I mean, a lot of you guys have excellent pitch, you've got excellent musical memory, playing by ear. Musicians aren't always aware of loudness, particularly young musicians. There's papers published on this about student musicians and their sense of how loud they're playing at. It's difficult to judge how loud a sound is. It's much easier these days because if you've got a smartphone, there are so many free decibel reader apps on your phone. So it used to be very difficult to measure sound. It's now fairly easy, and there's some fairly accurate ones in there. They'll give you a ballpark. They're not going to stand up in court if you're trying to take a case against your employer, but they'll give you a good idea. But in general as well, sound is too loud if you've got to raise your voice to be heard by somebody who's standing within the sort of comfort space of personal interaction. So somebody about a metre away from you. If you find your hearing's been affected, so you might notice it's being a bit dull, or you've got a blocked feeling in your ears, probably means you've been exposed to loud sound. If you've ruled out things like a cold or hay fever and congestion. If you experience tinnitus after exposure to noise, even if that's only fleetingly, you've damaged your hearing. And of course, if a sound is uncomfortable or painfully loud, that's your body telling you something, and that means the sound is too loud. So I've mentioned tinnitus, and that's really the focus of the organisation I work for. So I'm just going to explain a little bit about what tinnitus is, and also what can be done with it. Now, tinnitus is often called ringing in the ears. It's the perception of a sound when there's no corresponding external sound. It's not something that is classed as a disease or an illness. It is a symptom. It can be a very distressing symptom. And it varies from person to person. Everybody's tinnitus is different, everybody's reactions to it is different, and everybody will hear a different sort of sound. So they're as variable as human beings, really. I mean, some people hear tinnitus 24/7, some people hear it sporadically. I hear it when I'm stressed, and I hear two sounds. I hear a high-pitched whining like a mosquito, and I hear a lower rhythmical sound. But people can hear buzzing, hence we've got the bee. They can hear hissing. They can hear it sounding like a steam train or a kettle. And some people, particularly people with a musical background, will hear musical phrases. Now that can be snatches of music, or it can be snatches of song. There is one lady who made the newspapers a couple of years back because her tinnitus is snatches of How Much Is That Doggy in the Window and God Save the Queen, which is an interesting combination. And it shows that some people can actually hear more than one noise. I do, she does. It may feel that it's coming from one of your ears or both of your ears, maybe coming in the head. It may be difficult to pinpoint, and that's because the brain is trying to make sense of this sound. It kind of knows that sound comes from the ears and will come from one direction or the other. and it can't quite cope with actually the fact that it's generating the sound itself in the auditory system. Tinnitus can be experienced by people of all ages. It's often regarded as a condition that, oh, older people get that, it's something that only old people have, but actually people of any age can get it. The youngest person we know who experiences tinnitus and is able to talk about their tinnitus is 3 years old, and it's actually quite common in children. In adults, about 1 in 8 people experience what we call permanent tinnitus, which is tinnitus that is persistent for over a number of minutes. In children, the latest research shows that 1 child in 30 experiences what's classed as clinically significant tinnitus. So that is tinnitus that can be quite distressing, or it needs some intervention. And about 10% of the people who experience permanent tinnitus find it impacts on their quality of life. Now, we're expecting these numbers, both of children and people in general, to increase, partly because of an ageing population in terms of adults, but also some research that's come out of Canada is showing some worrying developments in the hearing of young people because of their exposure to noise in their leisure time. Musicians, the prevalence of tinnitus is much greater than in the general population. These are numbers that came out of studies of orchestral musicians in Scandinavia, I think particularly Finland, and they showed that more than 1/3 of orchestra musicians have tinnitus. And rather than 1 in 10 of those saying that it had a severe impact on them, 1 in 5 of them, or 20%, said that it had a severe impact on their life. And 43% reported something called hyperacusis. Now, hyperacusis is where sounds are painful or uncomfortable when their sounds at a normal level. So, for example, some people with hyperacusis find they're intolerant to, say, the sound of a vacuum cleaner, which the rest of us would, you know, we wouldn't really think about. And the severity of the tinnitus with these musicians is associated with how much sound exposure they've had over their lifetime. So the ones that have had more noise exposure had more severe tinnitus. These are professional musicians, so they're probably spending more time than the young people in your bands are, but it's something to be aware of. Hearing damage and noise exposure is cumulative, so it will build up. Now, we don't know the exact causes of tinnitus, we don't know the exact mechanisms of tinnitus, and research is underway to do that, but what we do know that it's generally caused by some sort of change. So either that can be a physical change, or that can be a change in somebody's psychological condition. So the physical changes are generally related to things like hearing loss and exposure to loud noise where the hearing is damaged. Stress and anxiety can exacerbate it. So at this time of year, with young people, we do get more calls, we do get more visits to the website, because people are experiencing tinnitus, and in situations like exam halls where it's quiet, their tinnitus stands out more. Anything that leaves you congested, so if you've got a cold, if you've got a hay fever, if you've got an ear infection, that can also generate tinnitus. And probably not so relevant to the discussion, some medical treatments can cause tinnitus as well. So probably having given a little bit of a horror story about tinnitus, I really want to kind of say, if you have tinnitus, don't panic. It's not going to be the end of the world. It's not going to be the end of a music career. It's not going to stop you doing what you want to do, but you may have to change what you do somewhat. If you do experience tinnitus, there isn't a test for tinnitus, it is all on self-report. We'd always suggest going to see your GP to rule out any physical causes. Some tinnitus can be caused by an earwax build-up. Clean out the earwax, your hearing comes back to normal, and your tinnitus goes. If there isn't a physical cause, then the GP can refer you on to ENT or audiology. They will run hearing tests, and they will also suggest management techniques. There's no cure, as I've said, but these management techniques, there are some successful ones out there. The caveat being that not all management techniques work for everybody. It is very much, again, a personal thing, finding out what you need to do. And sometimes you need to combine approaches. Like I said, do keep up usual activities. You might need to adapt them, for example, by looking after your ear health. It does generally get better with time, and it can fade to become more or less a minor irritation. In terms of tinnitus management, the sort of things that are effective, hearing aids, even if you've got a very mild hearing loss, hearing aids can be effective. One thing I will say, particularly for musicians, is you may notice, I mean, you will not get the same quality of hearing with a hearing aid, and you'll not get the same discrimination and frequency response with a hearing aid as you get with your ears. Ears are amazing things. Hearing aids are fantastic things too, just not quite as good. So it's important, you know, to avoid hearing loss if you can, because the replacements, although they're very good and will help in daily life, are not as good as the things we're born with, basically. Relaxation techniques, so Tai Chi, yoga, breathing exercises, they're all very useful. They can help with the feelings of fear and anxiety that often accompany tinnitus, and they can make tinnitus sound less intrusive. And mindfulness meditation has been particularly successful in this and is a new treatment being developed. Sound therapy sounds counterintuitive, using more sound to help with the sound that you're hearing in your head, but it's something that switches the brain's attention away from tinnitus. And it's particularly helpful in quiet spaces. So, for example, if you are reading or you are trying to get to sleep, then sound can help. Counselling, such as cognitive behavioural therapies, are also effective, and peer support too. Talking to other people who are effective and actually talking about it. One of the things we know, people feel very isolated if they have tinnitus. It's an invisible condition. So sharing worries with other people can be really helpful. And I think a lot in the music business find it very hard to talk about tinnitus with others and to admit that this has happened to them, because a lot of them do know the theory behind it, do know they should be protecting their hearing, and they feel guilty, or they feel that it's been their own fault that they've begun to experience tinnitus. And a lot of musicians, particularly professional musicians or sound engineers, for example, are worried about the impact it might have on their employment if they disclose that they've got tinnitus, because, you know, there's misconceptions that people might not be able to hear as well, they might not be able to play as well with tinnitus. In terms of some of the things that the BTA offered that people can do themselves, we have an online e-learning program called Take on Tinnitus, which covers a lot of those management techniques that we've talked about, including relaxation and getting a good night's sleep. It's kind of like having an audiologist on call in your computer to sort of take you through some exercises and knowledge. And for young people, we have some award-winning leaflets. Now, these are aimed at different age groups. I know in BYBA you have people in bands of all kinds of ages. So these start with the key stage, key stage 1. So the under 8s with a storybook approach about tinnitus, and also there's an accompanying activity book for each of these. Then there's a a booklet for children in upper primary school, and then there's a booklet for teenagers, which, as you can see, has got Jacqueline Wilson style sort of illustrations. So they're the sort of things that we can do. But as I said before, prevention is better than cure. And like I say, basically because there is no cure. As an organisation, we have a separate prevention campaign called Plug 'em, where we've got some musicians and ambassadors involved to get that message out there, particularly to young people. So this website might be something you want to point your young people to, because, you know, our main website is very much designed for adults. I wouldn't say it's stuffy. I mean, it's quite friendly and approachable, but it doesn't necessarily speak the language that young people speak, and Plug 'em's more like that. And it's got examples from people they might have heard of, like Mark Ronson and Savage, so that they've got some examples. And it talks about the importance of preventing tinnitus by looking after your hearing, talks about exposure levels, it talks about earplugs, and then we provide earplugs and we sell filtered earplugs in the BTA shop. But I'm going to hand over in a second back to Barbara, who's going to talk much more about earplugs and the options that are out there. It is something that we would always say use if you're going to be exposed to noise over 85 decibels. They are these days very unobtrusive. I keep a set in my handbag because I never know if, you know, if I walk into a bar, if I walk into a cinema, you know, they're just there so that I can use them. If you've got any questions after this, obviously I'll be around to try and answer them. But we do have a free phone helpline. We do have an email helpline. We're on social media, and we've got a website as well. So thank you very much for listening to this. I'm going to hand you back to Barbara, and she's going to take you through some of the earplugs and options that are available.
Lovely, thank you, Nick. So you need to stop your sharing and I'll take it over. So while you're just doing that, while we're just messing around with the screen, just we were supposed to have an audiologist join us from Hearology, and unfortunately they're not able to make it. So I have, based on my own research, pulled some information together, which I'm going to share with you now. So this is just based on my own experience and research. Yes, no, I'm not going to, oh, there we go. Okay, right. So can you see this moving on?
Yep.
Hooray. Okay, so thank you, Nick, for that. So we have various options, and I'm going to start really with the most expensive and move down to the cheapest. I think I like the fact that, Nick, you were saying you carry yours around in your handbag. I also have earplugs that I carry around in my handbag, and I found them very useful for all kinds of events. So the most expensive option, but possibly the best for people who are exposed to a lot of noise for a long amount of time, are custom fit earplugs. So for these earplugs, you need to visit an audiologist. So there are audiologists on the high street, and there are specialist audiologists as well. So it's a case of looking up your local ones, and they will measure your ears and fit the plugs, fit you. So they look like this. But they're moulded specifically for your ears, and they can last 2 or 3 years, these earplugs, before they need to be replaced. So generally you're talking several hundreds of pounds for this kind of option, but I would always remind everybody that actually how much is your hearing worth? Possibly if you're exposed to this frequently, it actually is that worth that investment. The next option, and there are lots and lots of these on the market, are ready-to-wear high-fidelity plugs. So what these do is they preserve the frequency of the noise. You kind of hear music and you hear sound as it would be, but just quieter. So it takes the kind of the edge off it. So what I've got on the screen are some options that I've kind of just got from online. There are lots of brands and there are lots of reviews online as well. So if you're thinking which ones to buy, I would definitely recommend having a look, Google things online for the best earplugs, best musicians' earplugs in particular, and you'll come up with lots of reviews and different options. These are just really by way of example to give you an idea of what these things look like and how much they typically cost. And again, in these we've got a big range, and they range from being passive, so the ones on the left you literally put them into your ear, make sure they fit snugly, and the ones on the right would come with little batteries and be much more active, so they would actively manage the noise that's going into your ears, and that's the price difference that you see there. But actually the ones that I carry around with me, I'm not sure which ones Nick has got, mine were about £20, something like that, and they do a really effective job as far as I'm concerned. So the Hearology brand, these again are very, very similar Hi-Fidelity ones, and they are £30 price range. The difference between the three there are they protect differently against different noise levels. So 102 is about 102 decibels, 104, 104 decibels, and 110 will protect up to 110 decibels. So it depends what application you want to use them for. But on their website, they kind of flag them as musician's choice, and they do have specialist musician audiologists in their particular practice. One of the very popular brands, one of the most well-known brands, is Alpine. So this gives you an indication of their prices. So they range between £15 and £25. So for most people, going to band every week, spending long amounts of time with members practicing, you know, £25 is not a huge amount of money for that amount of use, and they will last quite a long time. Hearology offers this plug as well, which is quite an interesting plug. I think the ones that Nick showed look very similar actually to these, and they are a foam plug, but they have a kind of a hard plastic end. So the foam plugs, and we'll see these in a minute, they literally just bung up your ear. They literally stop all sound coming into your ear. These ones are slightly more sophisticated, and they let some of that sound through. And then the foam plugs, you'll be familiar with those. Kind of you can get them from builders merchants. They're quite cheap, and drummers tend to use these plugs because they don't need to hear the pitch of the sound so much. They just need to dull the noise of the sound. So if nothing else, these are a very low cost option, which you can kind of wear if you haven't got anything else to hand. Hearology have offered us a special deal, and this is especially for member bands only. So there is a, if I move on, this is the Here and Now plug. So they work, if you buy them from their website, they're £5. If you look for them on Amazon, they're £4. But if you buy them with our special member code, you can get them for £3 a pair, which actually is a pretty good deal. So these plugs will last you probably 4 or 5 practice occasions, something like that, before they need to be replaced. So not hugely expensive for that amount of protection. I've used these myself, and although they're not as good as my Hi-Fidelity ones, they're perfectly acceptable. So and I've actually provided, I teach a line, I think all of you know, at Beaches, and my front line has all been given a pair of these, which I kind of make them wear now. So in terms of how to buy those, if you do want to take up that offer, we will be emailing the code to all BYBA members. So if you are registered as an individual member, or you're a member of the fellowship, or you have a band or a corps registered, you will be emailed with the code, and that code will change every year to reflect the current membership, so that only our members can benefit from that. So that's really a benefit of your membership of the British Youth Band Association. So I've given you the link there. The code is not active as yet, but it will be very shortly. So that really summarises what I wanted to say about ear protection, and apologies that we didn't have Hearology here. They would be much more in depth than I've been able to be in that. But we do have, as a British Youth Band Association, a call to action, which we are asking our bands and our corps and our members to really think hard about. And this is the call to action. So firstly, it's about recognising that this is an issue for you. And I think you can see the number of people that are on this webinar, and the fact that there's very few of us is a clear indication to me that people either don't recognise that it's an issue for them or don't want to acknowledge that it's an issue for them actually. So the second thing we want people to do is monitor their exposure, and Nick had referenced some of the apps. I'll come on to those in a minute. Then the third thing is target your riskiest situations, and fourthly, lead by example. So let me just run through those one at a time. So in terms of recognising, you know, the fact that you've attended this webinar, it's great. You kind of recognise that this is an issue that affects banding, but this webinar is actually just the start from the British Youth Band Association, and you will definitely be hearing more from us on this. It's not something that we'll just mention once and then forget about it. On monitoring, there is actually lots and lots of information online, and sound monitoring is a technical thing actually. You need to know what it is you are taking readings of and how to interpret those readings. There are various ways of weighting what you read, so you'll see dBA, dBB, dBZ, so it is a little complicated, and it's worth just taking your time reading through it. So when you are taking readings, and I've done this at various rehearsals recently, it's worth doing it in the different sections so you understand what those different readings are for different types of instruments, and not just the instruments that play, but also the colour guard. So they are generally, when they're practicing, performing to music, amplified music, and that can be quite loud, so it's worth just checking them as well. Check it also in ensemble and in different settings. So if you sometimes ensemble in, let's say, a school hall, that might have quite different acoustic properties to a classroom or outside area. So it's worth checking it inside and outside when you are on a kind of a parade setting, when you're on a field show setting, and also when you're sitting in concert or doing something, you know, inside in a concert hall. Most importantly, though, understand what those readings mean. It's very easy to get a very high reading and go, oh, that's a real problem. We've got loads of decibels, you know, it's 98 decibels, 110 decibels, that's the problem. But what you need to remember is that it's the amount of time that they're exposed at that level as well. So it's really important to understand what they mean. I did some just quick web research, and these are the two apps that I have found kind of recommended by people online, and also get a good review and get good reviews in the app stores. I'm sure there are many, many more. So I'm not suggesting these by any means are the only ones. Excuse me. What I would say is it's worth investing in the pro version of them. You can get them online for free, the free versions, but their functionality is limited. You can do less saving of your readings, and in one version you can only record dBZ weighted decibels, when actually it's the dBA ones you want to read. So yeah, there are kind of there are technicalities of this that are quite important to understand. So I think if you do have someone locally who is maybe in environmental health or who understands this kind of sound reading, call on their advice. That's what I would say, because it's quite easy to misunderstand what you've got there. The third thing that is targeting. So I'd say focus on where you'll make the most impact. And as Nick said, it's not necessarily where you would expect it. You know, flutes, piccolos can be really, really shrill, and they can do a lot of damage. For me, I notice it when I'm around cymbals, particularly hitting cymbals as a section really can be very loud. And then leadership. So first of all, wear your own plugs. Include them in any risk assessments that you've got, and incorporate them into any band manuals or welcome guides that you have. And over time, I'm hoping that wearing earplugs at band becomes just a very normal thing. Like your brass musicians will often wear gloves to protect the instrument. They care about that, but they don't care so much about their own hearing. Now, I appreciate this isn't always going to be possible, but providing plugs for free or at reduced prices to your members, that can be an incentive for them to use them. And even if they're just the foam plugs for your drummers, say, that's better than nothing. So in terms of BYBA's own actions, there are lots of campaigns online. So Nick has mentioned the Tinnitus Association's Plug 'em campaign. There's other campaigns like Love Music Longer is Hearology, is Don't Lose the Music is I think Action on Hearing, which is the Royal National Institute for the Deaf. And then there are kind of other campaigns. So we'll be looking at this and we'll be choosing which campaign we're going to go with. I suspect that Plug 'em actually is a really good campaign. Some of them feel less relevant to our activity because they're aimed at electronic amplified concert, you know, rock concert style settings. So we'll be thinking about that a bit more, but certainly there will be some kind of campaigning that goes on. And this isn't the last you'll hear from us on this, unless of course you don't wear your earplugs, then you might struggle to hear anything from anyone.